Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. A Russian passenger plane crashes in the remote far east of the country with nearly 50 people on board. No signs of survivors as rescuers battle rugged terrain. Plus, Trump pressures Columbia University into $200 million settlement as the Epstein files and Gaza talks put the White House under fresh spotlight. And United Nations and Israel trade blame over Gaza's hunger crisis as aid groups warn of mass starvation and the death toll from malnutrition continues to climb. We begin with a deadly plane crash in Russia's remote Far East. A passenger aircraft carrying nearly 50 people went down near the town of Tinda with no immediate signs of survivors. The Anatov 24 disappeared from radar during a second landing attempt, and rescuers later spotted the burning wreckage deep in a forested mountain area. Poor terrain is now hampering the recovery efforts. For more on this story, we're joined from Moscow by our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, thank you for joining us. First of all, what more do we know about the Anatov 24 crash and also the status of anyone who was on board?
Well, the Russian Investigative Committee has said that no one has presumably survived this plane crash, and we understand that the plane that was traveling en route from Khabarovsk to Blagoveshchensk and then to Tinda has indeed been trying to make the second landing at the airport, but it crashed. Its wreckage has been found about 15 kilometers away from the Tinda airport, its final destination, and it went missing shortly before the supposed time of landing. We also are hearing from the local authorities that there were 49 people on board, 43 of them passengers, 5 of them children, and 6 members of the crew. And interestingly, we are also hearing a lot now about the poor visibility in the area, which might have been the cause of this plane crash, but also the investigators are looking into the potential crew error during this landing.
Dasha, the aircraft in question is almost 50 years old. Is it common for older planes like this to be still flying in Russia's remote regions?
Well, actually, the assessments we got on the media about the Russian aviation companies suggest that 13 Russian airlines has the average age of the plane, which is more than 20 years. But that is not quite common for a plane to be that old. We understand that that type of plane has been operational in small companies for the short and middle distances. We also hearing that its certificate of security and safety has been extended recently until 2036, and the officials have been saying that it was undergoing the necessary technical maintenance. But at the same time, it does raise the question about the safety of operations of the Russian airlines in light of the Western sanctions that have indeed impacted the state of the Russian aviation fleet. But also we understand that the investigators have searched the airlines offices as well as the places where the staff workers of this company were operating at the airport of departure. That's according to the Russian investigators.
Dasha, officials are saying the plane went around for a second landing. It is obviously very early in this investigation. Do we know if weather or even the terrain that we're seeing on our screens played a role in the decision to go around for a second time?
It is indeed the case that is being investigated. It is one of the working versions that there might have been the crew error or perhaps the poor visibility that have impacted the decisions of that crew. And indeed, the understanding is that there was this second circle when the crew tried to land this plane. But the difficulty is also the mountainous terrain, and that is actually hampering the work of the investigators and the rescue teams. Therefore, the search and rescue operation has been conducted predominantly from air, and that is how they have managed to identify the burning wreckage of that plane.
Dasha, zoom out a little bit for a second. While all of this is happening, the Kremlin says it is pushing to create what they've described as buffer zones on the Ukraine border. What is the strategy there, and what does it actually tell us about Russia's mindset right now?
Well, Russia is saying that what it is going to do in Ukraine is to achieve its goals that have been stated in 2022. So Russia is quite stubborn when it comes to its position, and there have been no compromises on the Russian side when it comes to the achievement of those goals. Moscow says they are paramount for the Russian national security and safety of the country, and therefore at this stage, as Russia has been making gains on the battlefield in all directions and along the entire front line, Moscow has also been saying, with taking into account the supplies of Western weapons to Ukraine, it is critical for Russia to create that buffer zone on the Ukrainian territory to prevent those long-range missiles from getting the targets inside Russia. But at the same time, it is also the strategy that Russia is pursuing with regards to the safety of its border regions, because keep in mind that it was about a year ago that Ukraine has encouraged Russia's Kursk region, and the Russian authorities now are saying that some of the residents from the Kursk region are being held hostage in Ukraine. This is what was stated by the negotiators from Russia during the negotiations in Istanbul the day before, and this is what the Kremlin has also been referring to.
Dasha, before I let you go, obviously an aging infrastructure, ongoing military tensions. Is Russia now under more pressure domestically there in Moscow where you are than it is letting on?
Well, obviously, the sanctions have played a very significant role in the development of Russia. But Russia is restructuring. It is replacing what it relied upon was coming from the West to something that it can provide from other countries or produce domestically. And aviation industry is no exception. We understand that they have been trying to build more planes that are independent from the Western companies. Because, for instance, Sukhoi Superjet, this plane was also reliant on some of the spare parts for the engines that were coming from the Western countries. Now they have to build it from scratch here domestically with spare parts coming from other countries, but preferably produced domestically to exclude any possibility of such a breakthrough of supply chains in the future. And therefore, it is taking time for several Russian industries to re-strategize, to rebuild, to reconnect, and to restore the level of maintenance. So certainly it is taking time, but obviously that is creating the pressure on the economy, because the Russian government has to spend on military actions, they have to spend on the people who are fighting, on their recovery, and also on all of those industries that require more attention than ever before.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Columbia University will pay $200 million to the US government in a deal restoring its access to federal funds. That's after Trump threatened to cut support over claims it failed to protect Jewish students. The settlement comes as his Middle East envoy heads to Rome for a possible breakthrough in Gaza ceasefire talks with Israeli and Qatari officials. Meanwhile, the White House is pushing back against a report that Trump was named in the Justice Department document that is relating to Jeffrey Epstein, calling it fake news. To discuss this in more detail, we're joined by Ellie Cohanim, the former US Deputy Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism. Ellie, first of all, Colombia's $200 million settlement is being called a turning point. Do you see it as proof that the government is finally taking campus anti-Semitism seriously?
Michael, it's great to be with you. And I have to start out by sharing that Columbia University is my alma mater. And Columbia is also where this pro-Hamas movement encampments on American campuses started 2 years ago. And so this is a real victory for the Trump administration and finally forcing the hand of the Columbia University administration to take action against these student agitators, which often cross the line into harassment and violence against Jewish students, but also even folks who worked at the university. There were a lot of staff members who were victims in the midst of all this. And certainly there was the creation of a very hostile environment against Jewish students at Columbia University. Many Jewish students wound up having to hide their Jewish identity just to be able to safely walk across the campus at Columbia. And so I think that this is, in fact, a turning point, a real breakthrough, and it sends a very loud signal to other universities across America that the Trump administration means business. They're not going to tolerate any anti-Semitism on U.S. campuses.
Ellie, you mentioned it yourself, but Jewish students said they felt unsafe for months during the protests that were taking place. Did Columbia fail in its duty of care? And is this settlement really a quietly admission of that?
I think it is a quiet admission of that. And the university failed. I think the best proof of that is the fact that they are now on their third university president since these pro-Hamas encampments sprouted on the Columbia campus. And so, you have to ask yourself, why is it that one university president after the next was replaced, and even this one is an interim president? It's because the country looked in disdain as Columbia University's administration seemed to fail to hold these students accountable, to expel them from campus, which was something that they always, all of the actions that Columbia University is taking now against these students, these options were on the table. And in fact, each university has campus rules and regulations. The students were each time breaking the university's own rules, but yet the university administrators seem to have a completely failed moral compass and incapable of taking action that they could have taken again from day one. So I do think that this is very strong statement from the Trump administration to all the universities in the United States. And I do think that Columbia, in effect, is signaling that they failed to take action and were really forced. Their hand was forced by the U.S. government, and it was very much a financial incentive. They were at the loss of potentially billions of dollars in federal funding, and so this is what seems to have finally forced Columbia University's administration to take the action that they should have taken from day one.
Ellie, pro-Palestinian demonstrations at Columbia and other schools have been called anti-Israel by some, but others say they crossed into outright anti-Semitism. Where do you draw the line? And did the Columbia protests, in your opinion, go too far?
I would say they certainly did go too far because, again, where you draw the line is when speech moves from free speech to hate speech, and also when you see violence. And so there was many instances of documented violence at the Columbia campus and destruction of property. There was the takeover of Hamilton Hall, which is one of the buildings on campus. As I mentioned before, not only were students assaulted over the course of this past 2 years, but there were even staff members, the facility staff, what they called the janitorial staff, who had to go and clean up after these students. And often they were also caught in the midst of the violence. So that's where you draw the line again from free speech to hate speech and violence. And the university had so many opportunities to stand up against this hatred that was flourishing on the campus, and they failed to do so over and over again. So I do think that we will expect to see a turning point now where all of the university administrators now will understand what is expected of them as the leaders on these college campuses.
Well, now that we've seen this imposed upon Columbia, is this really about campus safety, $200 million after the fact? Or is it more signalling that the US is in solidarity with Israel? Is it some level of a soft power diplomacy that's been wrapped up in a domestic policy?
Well, the United States and Israel certainly share a very special bilateral relationship. It's something that I've written about for the America First Policy Institute, and I think that we saw that very clearly in the 12-day war when we saw the United States and Israel in combination take out these targeted strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, which were spectacularly successful. However, what I would share is that domestically in the United States, there's also a real frustration with what is deemed a hateful movement, a pro-Hamas movement across our college campuses and in many of our city streets. And this is considered a domestic problem. President Trump spoke about it on the campaign trail. He said that he would have zero tolerance, that he would hold all parties accountable. And we saw this also in the State Department, where immediately after the Trump administration came into office, we saw a new policy that the State Department was going to start reviewing student visas, all international visas for those people who come into America and want to spread either hateful views or want to undermine American society. And I think that that really is the heart of it, is that there's a perception, and I believe rightfully so, that the pro-Hamas movement also undermines American society, that it's an anti-Western civilization movement, and that there are a lot of foreigners who've come into the United States to cause trouble, and they don't belong here.
Ellie Cohanim in Washington, thank you so much for joining us. Let's take a look at some of the other stories that are making the headlines today. At least 4 people have died and over 100 have been injured in a powerful explosion in Syria's Idlib countryside. Rescue teams are working amid ongoing secondary blasts. Authorities have urged residents to stay clear as emergency crews carry out evacuation and rescue efforts. 8 Israeli soldiers were wounded when a car rammed into a bus stop in central Israel in what police are calling a terror attack. The driver fled the scene near Kfar Yona and is now the target of a wide manhunt involving helicopters and dog units. French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte are filing a defamation suit at the Delaware Superior Court against Candace Owens. It comes after the American right-wing influencer promoted the claim that the French First Lady is a man. Macron and his partner say that Owens waged a campaign of global humiliation. And wrestling legend Hulk Hogan has died at the age of 71. He was found dead in his Clearwater, Florida home on Thursday morning. Hulk Hogan starred in movies such as No Holds Barred, Suburban Commando and Mr. Nanny. At least 9 people are dead and more than 40,000 people have been evacuated from the areas around the border between Thailand and Cambodia. That after the neighbouring countries exchanged fire in a sharp escalation in tension between the two sides over a border dispute that erupted weeks ago. Thailand's army also said it launched airstrikes to on-ground military targets on the other side of the border. Patrick Falk has this report from Singapore.
Deep in Thailand's Surin province along its border with Cambodia, gunshots exchanged as clashes intensify. Tensions have been simmering for weeks following the killing of a Cambodian soldier in May at an undemarcated area claimed by both sides. But the escalation in violence has taken people living close by surprise. How many shots have been fired, asks one woman taking cover with several others in bunkers fortified in recent weeks. Both sides accuse the other of firing the shots first. Following the initial exchange, Thailand's army says it launched airstrikes on ground military targets, while Cambodia's defense ministry accused Thai jets of dropping bombs on a road near the ancient Prayavir temple. Phnom Penh has condemned what it called reckless and brutal Thai military aggression. Thailand's acting Prime Minister Bumtham Wechayachai is calling for calm.
We are currently investigating the details. We need more information as the situation requires caution and prudence, and we must adhere to international law.
In the Thai capital, many people are unsettled by the unfolding violence. I wanted to end, says this motorcycle taxi driver, but if we don't retaliate, Cambodia will think we're weak. Thailand and Cambodia have contested sovereignty at various undemarcated points along their shared border for more than a century. But the most recent dispute has taken a bitter turn. On Wednesday, Thailand downgraded diplomatic relations with Cambodia and also expelled Cambodia's ambassador to Thailand in protest against a landmine blast which wounded 5 Thai soldiers. In a tit-for-tat move, Cambodia also expelled the Thai ambassador and recalled all of its embassy staff. So finding a diplomatic solution to this crisis will be all the more difficult. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya.
The United Nations and Israel are trading blame over the deepening hunger crisis in Gaza as aid groups warn of mass starvation. Israel says it's allowing enough aid into the Strip and accuses the UN of failing to collect it. But the United Nations says Israeli restrictions, bombings and bureaucracy are preventing the deliveries. Meanwhile, the death toll from malnutrition continues to rise, with over 100 aid agencies calling this situation catastrophic. To talk about this in more details, we're joined from Gaza by ICRC spokesperson Hisham Mehanna. Hisham, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, 111 people is what we have reports of now having died from malnutrition. There are parents who are feeding their children animal feed, surviving on salt and water. From what you're seeing on the ground in Gaza, how close are things to a full-scale famine if we are not already there? Is the world really underestimating this sheer scale of what's going on and the severity of what's happening in Gaza?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I can speak to what we witnessed as ICRC at our field hospital in Rafah, southern Gaza Strip, approximately 2 kilometers away from the aid distribution sites, and since May 27th has been receiving mass casualty incidents. Many people, almost on every day, are arriving at the hospital with gunshot wounds, shrapnel in their bodies, different age groups, women and men. And the majority of them have stated that they were trying to reach the aid distribution sites. Also, patients, including children, pregnant women, arrive at our maternity ward at the field hospital with signs of malnutrition. Our hotlines never stop receiving phone calls from civilians desperate for support, desperate for aid, for food. Some of them are also trapped in areas that were impacted by evacuation orders. The ICRC have been supporting community kitchens that provide hot meals for thousands of families on a daily basis. That's the only hot meal they receive in their day and feed their children with. And unfortunately, it has been severely impacted by the dwindling supplies, and sometimes, like, 4 out of these community kitchens at least have had to halt work because they ran out of food supplies. I'm talking about rice, lentil, these kind of basic ingredients that are used to produce these kind of meals. So this is just a glimpse of what we are facing, what we are struggling with, and what we are trying to cope in order to continue providing our urgently needed humanitarian assistance. Of course, there are alarming concerns about the food crisis in Gaza. Our own team in Gaza, plus 350 aid workers for the ICRC in Gaza, are impacted by the scarcity of food, and they cannot find on a daily basis the enough quantities of food and clear water, the same as the entire population of Gaza. The reports that are coming from the health authorities in Gaza are extremely alarming. And the problem is crystal clear to everyone now after plus 21 months since this conflict has erupted.
Hisham, Israel said 150 aid trucks were collected yesterday, hundreds more are waiting. We've spoken to UNRWA and we've heard from the WHO, who say that over 600 is the actual figure of food trucks and aid trucks that need to get through every day. Is the issue here primarily access, or has the entire distribution system collapsed under the security situation that you're facing on the ground?
If we have 600 trucks entering Gaza on a daily basis for at least 2 to 3 months, that would be the bare minimum to restore normalcy, i.e., to have enough supplies, not just food, not just medicine, but also pipelines to prepare the water connections, spare parts for the generators that are feeding hospitals, prosthetics for the thousands of amputees who have lost their limbs. And the list is endless because everything is lacking in Gaza. If this happens, if that's going to be the case, then we are lucky enough. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Unfortunately, the restrictions on the entry of aid have crippled the situation, have made it even more dire, have put the civilians into going through a risky journey every day. That's how desperate they are. They're risking their lives in order to just find some flour and rice to feed their families. And it doesn't seem to end. We have, as ICRC, expressed our concerns regarding the recently introduced aid mechanism that is enforced and that has unfortunately substituted an already functional system, efficient system, principled system of delivering aid, which respects the human dignity, which respects people's suffering, and try to bring aid to them, not to have them walk for several miles through damaged roads, losing 1,000 dignities every day in order to be lucky enough to have just, a handful of basic food items.
Hisham,
absolutely intolerable and unacceptable.
Hisham, the United Nations are saying that their convoys are being blocked, even shot at as well. From your point of view, the ICRC, what are you experiencing on the ground, you and your team? Are you able to move at all, or are conditions now simply unworkable for the team?
This food crisis is exacerbated by the non-stop hostilities that are expanding in areas in Gaza from time to time, plus the evacuation orders that have become a regular habit, and they are impacting the majority of the Gaza space. That pushes civilians into a further ever shrinking space. That also diminishes an already limited humanitarian space. For humanitarian workers to be able to fulfill their job, to bring the positive change we want to bring in people's life after 21 months of living through hell, we need food, we need aid, we need fuel, we need all these food aid items to be brought in immediately, unimpededly, safely, and we need also the guarantees. Humanitarian workers in Gaza, same as medical workers, healthcare staff, have been subject to the impact of these hostilities. Some of them have been killed, injured, detained. Many of them have lost their loved ones even, and they are also looking to secure the needs of their families. This formula can never work if it is maintained. The solution is very simple, and it is inevitable. We need political agreement as soon as possible that preserves the human life and dignity in Gaza, that paves the way for unimpeded and safe humanitarian aid, impartial aid, that we can actually bring into the people in a timely fashion and in a way that preserves their dignity.
Hisham, some Israeli officials claim the United Nations and aid groups on the ground are inflating the crisis to harm Israel's image. How do you respond to that statement, especially when doctors and you're telling us that we are pretty much already in famine in Gaza?
Well, this is not for me to comment on. I mean, it's clear that there is an absence of an efficient law and order system in Gaza after all what we have witnessed. And this is also a major challenge because people are so desperate, they don't care of anything but to, feed their babies, feed their hungry members of their families. So again, it's all back to the same root cause. It's because of the restrictions. It's because of the nonstop hostilities. It's because of the prolonged conflict now that has been lasting for a long time. And we have witnessed countless numbers of trends that are all horrific, bloody, and unjustified to be maintained for this long period of time now.
Hisham, Mehanna in Gaza, thank you so much for joining us on W News. For more on this, we're joined from Tel Aviv by Leanne Pollock David, who is the International Strategy Advisor and the co-founder of the Israeli Coalition for Regional Security. Leanne, thank you so much for joining us on this. Over 100 confirmed deaths from malnutrition, and the UN is saying mass starvation is what's currently happening on the ground in Gaza. What responsibility does Israel bear for this crisis, which is now worsening? Or is this still justifiable as part of the counter-terror strategy?
Look, the realities on the ground are unbearable. And I think every Israeli that looks at these pictures feels the pain and feels a lot of empathy and does not want to see one single civilian in Gaza suffering. I have to tell you that this is all over the Israeli news. The Israelis care about the civilian population in Gaza and does not want to see them suffer. We are not at war with them. We are at war with Hamas that still is refusing to release 50 hostages, 20 out of which are alive and are being kept underground under the most terrible conditions over 650 days. And what we're seeing now today is that even after the intensive negotiations that has been going on in Doha for the last few weeks, Hamas is just raising the bar every single time and then basically forcing us all to continue this terrible situation. The vast majority of Israelis are looking for a ceasefire, or want a ceasefire, want this war to end, and do not want to see any Gazan population being hurt. And the realities on the ground are as such that, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund was established in order to separate Hamas from the civilian population, because of course Hamas, what it does, it steals the trucks, it steals the aid. No one single Hamas terrorist is missing out on a meal, let's say it this way. And Hamas wants to see its own population suffering. And so a lot of part of this is because of that. But of course, the recent effort for the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, I basically call it a failure, because the failure is that in the end, after months and months of trial and error to find the right mechanism that will improve the previous situation where Hamas kept stealing the trucks and the humanitarian aid from its own population, the new system has not been able to change that. And so what we're seeing is the Gazan population suffering, Hamas continues to steal, and Israel is being blamed for it. Israel has
Leanne, let me just interject for 1 second.
I want to say clearly, Israel has certain responsibility towards what's going on in Gaza, but it cannot take the full responsibility for what's happening with Hamas and still...
Correct, but Israel can take the responsibility, Leanne, for 800 trucks that are waiting uncollected. 28 of those got through yesterday. Far short, as we just heard a few seconds ago from Hamish, saying 600 need to get through every single day. There's a logistical issue here, but we're hearing that Israel is obstructing the flow of aid. How do you respond to that?
So look, I think that nobody really understands what the realities on the ground really are. It's a lot of chaos out there, but I can tell you that in terms of the amount of aid, it's coming in, and the issue is with the distribution channels. It's not being managed well enough, and this is the realities on the ground. It's chaotic, it's at war zone. The issue that I mentioned earlier about Hamas still stealing and being hostile towards aid workers, by the way, as well, yeah? It's stealing the aid from humanitarian aid workers, from the truck drivers, etc., which then the IDF needs to intervene. So everyday situations like that are not being resolved. The new system has not proven itself. And I want to tell you one thing that I said to you in the previous conversation that we had. We have to get to a ceasefire. This is the only sustainable solution. We cannot continue with this war. The hostages need to be released yesterday. They are in there over 650 days. And the Gazan population deserve a better situation. They deserve a prospect of a future. So all the leverage, all the international pressure needs to be now on Hamas to finally agree to a ceasefire that we all want and need. We need it urgently, to agree to that and not continue to raise the bar the same way that it did just now in the recent 24 hours.
And we are hopeful that that ceasefire and that deal can be reached. Now, the UN and the WHO say that convoys are being shot at, humanitarian workers have been attacked as well, along with civilians. When we spoke last, you refuted this, saying that civilians were not being shot at and aid workers certainly were not being shot at. But now even the WHO's warehouse came under fire. Can you acknowledge there's a real risk to aid workers on the ground and to civilians?
Of course, there isn't a risk. This is a war zone. And as I mentioned, it's also very chaotic. But what I continue to say is that Israel does not target civilian population and definitely not aid workers. On the contrary, Israel, the IDF, in many instances, is the one protecting both the civilian population and the aid workers from attacks from Hamas. So this is the very complex realities on the ground. And yes, there is a risk. There is a risk to civilian population, and there is a risk to aid workers. And Israel does whatever it can to basically protect them. But again, this war has been going on for too long. And we cannot continue with this current situation. We have to get to a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire. We have to get a lot of aid in. And we also need to acknowledge the fact that even when the ceasefire hopefully reaches its point very soon, this issue of Hamas stealing the humanitarian aid and then having a feast in the tunnels is not going to end. Yeah, we still are going to have to find a way to cater with the regional community, with the international community, to find a way to rehabilitate the Gazan population without it fueling a terrorist organization that only wants the suffering of its own people. And I know it's hard to believe. For me, it's also hard to believe, but this is really the situation.
Leanne, I just want to tell you one last thing before.
From Israeli public perspective, we do not want to see the civil population suffering or skipping even one single meal.
Just before I let you go, BBC, AFP, AP, Reuters, they're all saying their own journalists in Gaza are starving alongside the people that they are covering. Journalists are protected under international law, and they're now facing famine in this, as you rightly described it, a war zone, but it is controlled by Israel. Will Israel intervene in some way here to assist these people who are there doing their jobs?
Yes, I think right now there is a realization that, as I mentioned, the new system that was there in order to separate Hamas from the civil population is not working. So the current operation has not improved the previous distribution system. The problem basically persists. And so there is a reevaluation of the situation on how to get much more inflow of humanitarian aid, with the risk of Hamas taking over some of it. But still, the most important thing is for the civil population, of course, journalists and aid workers, not to miss one single meal. This is important for every Israeli.
Leanne Pollock, David, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Tel Aviv on W News. Thank you. Now let's take a look at some of the top business news. The EU and the US are nearing a trade deal that would place 15% tariffs on most imports from the bloc. US President Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs of 30% should a deal not be reached by August the 1st. In preparing possible countermeasures, the EU said it would impose tariffs on more than $100 billion worth of US goods starting on August the 7th. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has signed a free trade deal with Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer in a multi-million-pound export boost. The deal took 3 years to reach and also commits to a new India-UK plan to tackle illegal immigration. The UK government says the deal will boost the GDP by about £4.8 billion and create 2,500 jobs.
That is unlike any other team.
Turning to sport now. The Major League Soccer Commission declined to comment on whether Inter Miami star Lionel Messi will face disciplinary action after he unexpectedly was absent from yesterday's All-Star game in Austin. Miami League notified that Messi would not participate, a move that could trigger suspension under league rules. And now a reminder of our top stories today. A Russian passenger plane crashed in the remote Far East with nearly 50 passengers on board. No signs of survivors as rescuers are battling rugged terrain. Trump pressures Columbia University into $200 million of a settlement as Epstein files in Gaza talks put the White House under fresh spotlight. And United Nations and Israel trade blame over Gaza's hunger crisis as aid groups warn of mass starvation and the death toll from malnutrition continues to climb. That's all from us on W News. Don't forget, as always, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on X. GNT with Mahal Prendergast is on the way next, and we'll be back with just a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye for now.